Hello and welcome to another episode of Chuchu is a Ranker, and on this episode we are going to be discussing the discography of the English art rock icon PJ Harvey. Hailing from Bridport in Dorset, PJ Harvey got her proper start in 1991 when she formed the PJ Harvey Trio. That band recorded 2 grunge-adjacent albums before PJ disbanded the unit and went properly solo, eventually putting out 10 studio albums. Over the course of her eclectic career, PJ Harvey has garnered lashings of critical praise and MBE from the then British Queen for her services to music, and famously is the only 2-time recipient of the Mercury Music Prize. And as for my own fandom, yeah, I like PJ Harvey. I think her work is nicely varied and I appreciate the way that she marches to the beat of her own drum. She's an artist who is truly unique. So, without further ado, let's be complete rankers and rank up a storm. These are the studio albums of PJ Harvey, ranked from worst to best. So, we're going to be kicking off this list with Rid of Me from 1993, which was PJ Harvey's second LP. And as I mentioned in the intro, this album hails from her time when she was part of the PJ Harvey Trio, along with Rob Ellis on drums and Steve Vaughan on bass. It would, however, be the last of PJ's albums in a proper band format, as she would disband the group after this LP. And yeah, controversy ahoy! To put Rid of Me in last place is a bold move for sure, as it's a very popular and critically lauded record. In fact, there is a large contingent out there that would put this at the top of the list rather than the bottom. And I get where those people are coming from. Rid of Me is a really cool album with a raw dark energy and a confrontational feminist swagger. So don't get me wrong, Rid of Me may be coming in last, but that does not mean it's a bad record. I mean, straight up, PJ Harvey seems almost incapable of making a bad record. That said, the whole super raw grungy Steve Albini production thing that's going on here is my least favourite PJ Harvey sound. I don't particularly like Nirvana or Alice in Chains or anything from that movement in general, with perhaps the exception of the Pixies. I quite like that band. But for me, the very focused, raw and dirgy production beats the subtlety and emotion out of the tunes. Well, every emotion except anger. That emotion is still very much on display here. You see, my favourite PJ Harvey records feel like a warm hug between 2 sad people and having a nice cup of tea in a peaceful countryside of England somewhere. This LP, on the other hand, feels like someone repeatedly flipping you off in a cracked inn somewhere in Wapping. I mean, which is cool in its own way. I live in Japan and I'm used to having costume girls doing unmentionable things to my personage with kendo sticks and such like, so I'm down with masochism. But I still prefer PJ when she's being nice and offering me a chocolate biscuit. Still though, this album does have its own charms, and tracks like Rid of Me, Man-Size Sextet, 50 Foot Queenie and Yuri G do kick a whole bunch of growling distorted grungy ass. As I said, this may be my least favourite PJ Harvey release, but it's still pretty good. However, it's also undeniably the record in her discography that I come back to the least, 3.5 stars. Next up we have Drive from 1992, which was PJ Harvey's debut LP and the only other album aside from Rid of Me where she was part of a definitive band. And PJ comes swinging out of the gates with a snarling grunge-adjacent album that fit right in with the Nirvana-fueled zeitgeist of the times. Much like Rid of Me, PJ's in angry, abrasive, semi-feminist mode here, spitting venom and fire about relationship woes and sounding pretty pissed off and vengeful. However, unlike Rid of Me, Drive's a lot more layered and subtle and has much more in the way of melody. This in turn helps the LP feel less oppressive than the album that followed. It's also notably pacier, with a lot of these songs rocketing by at a fair old clip. And yeah, although grunge will never be a favourite genre of mine, this is nevertheless a good example of it. It's catchy and energetic, and PJ herself is in very good vocal form. Her voice on this record has a deep booming quality to it that heightens the impact and raucous energy of the tunes. In fact, there's not much to complain about here, aside from it being rooted in the sound and genre that's my least favourite among her output. Although maybe I would say that the last 2 tracks, Fountain and Water, are an incremental step down in the quality department, so the record doesn't finish as strong as it could have, but that's a very minor blemish at most. Dry is basically just a really good quality grunge record that delivers exactly what you would want and expect from this style of music. Highlights on a tight release includes the wiry opener Oh My Lover, which has an appropriately grimy mood to it. Old Stella has a kind of cool funkiness driving its rhythm section. Dress is awesome with its strident pickup in the chorus. It's one of PJ Harvey's best outright rockers for sure. In the same vein, Sheila and the Gig is both catchy and energetic, with PJ memorably growling, "Wash your breasts. I don't want to be unclean," he said. "Keep those dirty pillows away from me." Well, PJ, you're welcome to bring those dirty pillows over to mine any day of the week. While Plants and Rags is also fantastic with its creaking statico violins and clean acoustic guitars. The track has a nice indie rock vibe that I rather like. So yeah, much like Rid of Me, Dry comes in low on the list simply because the whole grunge thing is her least interesting sound for me personally. But the added layers, catchiness and rocking pace do put it ahead of Rid of Me, and I do think that this is a pretty great LP with many highly enjoyable tunes on it. 4 stars. Next up we have To Bring You My Love from 1995, which was PJ's third LP. And here the PJ Harvey trio is officially disbanded and Polly Jean finally set sail on the uncharted waters of a proper solo career. And with this move comes a new sound, as here the grunge sound that dominated her first 2 releases is mostly shown the door, replaced by a set of art rock tunes that have a kind of swampy, murky, postmodernistic blues feel to them. Yet at the same time the album also feels like a twisted reflection of the Britpop trend that was in full swing at the time. Although I don't think anybody would be so crass as to label PJ Harvey a Britpop artist, she still managed to fit in perfectly with that particular movement. And this ranking is, of course, a very controversial one, as much like Rid of Me, To Bring You My Love is an incredibly popular and acclaimed release that is largely considered to be one of her best, if not her actual best LP. And while I disagree with that, I can still understand why this album is so beloved. At the time, it represented a huge step forward for PJ Harvey and was also her breakthrough into the mainstream, with the album granting her 3 top 40 singles in the UK. It also houses some of her most crowd-pleasing and straight-up best tunes. So, why is it languishing so low on the list, I hear you ask? Well, firstly I will say that I do like this album. I mean, we've already breached the 4-star mark on this list, so we're on very solid ground by default. But I do feel that it's arguably the most inconsistent release by PJ Harvey. When this LP is at its best, as I already said, it does deliver some of her very best songs. But on the flip side, when it's at its weakest, it also delivers some of her least interesting ones. Specifically, the low burbling dirges that pop up occasionally, such as Working for the Man, Teklo, and I Think I'm a Mother. None of them are egregious. I mean, I wouldn't ever call them bad songs, but if I were to make a list of my top 10 least favourite PJ Harvey songs, those 3 would definitely be on it. I just feel that they're a little embryonic, especially when compared to later examples. For instance, the low dirges on her next album, Is This Desire, are a lot better in my opinion. That said, everything else on this is pretty great. Highlights would include the gradually building blues-tinged opener and title track To Bring You My Love. Meet Z Monster is rad with its grimy swagger and unforgettable chorus. Come On Billy has a really cool country rock inflected bang and shimmy to it, plus PJ just sounds so sultry on the track, it's enough to instantly give you half a stock. Long Snake Moan absolutely slaps with its smoke-belching heavy rock assault. While Down by the Water is an obvious PJ Harvey classic with its creeping fuzz bass, bluesy pulse and suspiciously sinister lyrics. So yeah, To Bring You My Love is a great art rock record that is defined by some really towering high spots. It's just the odd humdrum dirge and the fact that I just like most of her other records more that see it stall here. But as I said, it's still great. 4 stars. Next up we have the Hope 6 Demolition project from 2016, which was PJ's 9th LP. And the title, the Hope 6 Demolition Project, refers to an American redevelopment project that knocks down slums and redevelops them, which unfortunately prices out the people that used to live there and leads to gentrification and ultimately cultural and societal exclusion. Which means, yes, this is PJ Harvey's political record, which saw her take inspiration from her trips to the impoverished areas of Washington DC, Afghanistan and Kosovo. Bizarrely, this led to some backlash, with American politicians denouncing the record, complaining that PJ Harvey was only pointing out problems but offering no solutions. Which I don't get. Is it PJ Harvey's job to find solutions to those problems? No, it's not. Whose job is that? Oh yeah, that's your job, Mr. Politician. Drawing attention to contentious issues, though, has been a staple of music and lyrics since the whole concept of music was invented, so I don't know what the fuck the backlash was about. People gone crazy. That said, the lyrics on this record are ultimately what does place it quite low on this list. I don't dislike them, nor do I begrudge PJ Harvey a political album, it's just that I prefer the other subjects that she sings about. Obviously I like her meditations on love and relationships, but even within the context of her more recent concept albums, I prefer the reflections of military combat from Let England Shake or the folklore orientated Ironside the Old Year Dying. Also, her lyrical style is a bit utilitarian on this. It's kind of blunt and lacks her usual sense of poetry. She just goes straight to the point here, no faffing about. I do find her lyrics on this to be interesting, just not quite as emotive as I'd like. The record does have a massive upside though, which is the music. Firstly, I think the production on this is fantastic. The record just sounds great. In fact, I think this LP has the best sounding production of any PJ Harvey record. It sounds rich and wide and full of subtle little details. Plus the melodies of the tunes are just on point here. It's a really satisfying and inviting album, melodically speaking. I'm not 100% sure if the lovely melodies and mostly negative lyrics entirely match up, but I do really love the songs from a melodic and musical standpoint. My cherry picks from a consistent LP would be the opening The Community of Hope, which kicks the record off with an upbeat jangler that has some striking lyrics directly relating to the Hope 6 Demolition project. The Ministry of Defense grabs the ears with its bombastic stuttering guitar riff that adds a lot of drama to the tune. River Anacostia is stunningly beautiful with its wraith-like vocal melody and sadness-soaked distant guitar shimmer. The Orange Monkey is fantastic with its airy backing vocals and lovely ascending melody that swells up magnificently, while The Wheel has an upbeat jangle pop bounce, yet on closer inspection is about the awfulness of murdered children in war zones and ethnic cleansing, which feels sadly pertinent right now. So yeah, add into that the minimalistic blues march of Closer, Dollar Dollar and the rampaging saxophones of the Ministry of Social Affairs, and you have a great jangly indie rock record. Would I have preferred some more personal lyrical content? Yes, but I still like every song on this record anyway. 4 stars. Next up we have White Chalk from 2007, which was PJ Harvey's 7th LP. And here we have a very specific album with a very specific mood and atmosphere. For this LP, PJ Harvey learned how to play the piano, and boy is she determined to get the most out of her study, crafting an album that is 100% based upon classical piano riffs. Which is an interesting choice because as a newly minted piano player, PJ is not actually all that technically adept on the instrument. But instead of blinding you with technical wizardry, she cleverly leans on the more ghostly ethereal elements of the piano, with her foot firmly planted on the reverb pedal. And this results in a super atmospheric and very cohesive piece that feels darkly gothic and ancient. The entire record feels like a Victorian ghost story, like it somehow transports you to the set of the movie Crimson Peak or whatever other haunted mansion movie you can think of. And I'm totally there for it. I'm a sucker for records that have a really thick atmosphere, and White Chalk has one of the best. As for highlights, well, that's kind of a moot point here. This just isn't that kind of album. It really is all about that languorously gothic atmosphere, and that's all. Still though, a couple of standouts would include the opening track, The Devil, which has some nice thumping drums that add a frisson of energy. Dear Darkness shows off PJ's new vocal style that she uses on this LP, all high-pitched and banshee-like. It's a style that totally works for what she's trying to do here and increases the already stifling atmosphere of the tunes. Title track White Chalk is utterly gorgeous, with the wilting melodies and PJ's yearning lyrics about her home county of Dorset going straight for the English heart, while the piano has a notable vocal performance that sees PJ Harvey going off-key to dramatic effect, vastly enhancing the drama of the tune in the process. But you can't go wrong with any of the tunes on this, as they all feed perfectly into the overall atmosphere and concept. As for nitpicks, well, to be honest, I don't have any, personally speaking. For what this is, a 33-minute album of ghostly piano folk, I think it's perfect. I think PJ Harvey absolutely knocked it out of the park. But I will also admit that for some it might be a love it or hate it kind of record. Some people just don't dig gothic Victorian sounding piano folk and may well think this is one note and a bit boring. But I personally think it's absolutely fantastic and about as good as this kind of music gets. 4.5 stars. Next up we have I Inside the Old Year Dying from 2023, which was PJ's 10th LP and most recent to date. And this album sees Harvey deep in concept album mode, as she takes inspiration from her own epic poem Orlum, which was a published book-length narrative poem written in a dead Dorset-specific dialect and focusing on the myths and folklore of the English countryside. Jesus! PJ Harvey taking the word bookish to a whole new level there. Then again, that as a concept seems so far inside her wheelhouse that it's about as surprising a move as a plumber fixing a clogged toilet. And predictably it works like a charm, with artist and theme working in perfect symbiotic harmony. And stylistically speaking, this LP has much in common with her previous entry White Chalk, in that it's predominantly a mood piece, with the overall atmosphere taking precedence over the individual pieces. It does differ from White Chalk in instrumentation though, as this LP is much more of a guitar focused affair. That said, it's not rocking in the least bit, having more in common with a folk record than a rock one. The guitars on this are either beautifully picked acoustics or absolutely drenched in reverb and echo. This results, again much like White Chalk, in an ethereal vibe. But unlike that record's dark gothic texture, this one is wispy and dreamlike. It perfectly evokes images of leafy forests and burbling brooks, thus totally fitting the album's theme. Plus it's just a really relaxing and beautiful sound. As for highlights, this LP once again echoes White Chalk. It's much more about the overall cohesive atmosphere rather than the individual bangers. However, there are some tunes on this that I really love. The opening Prayer at the Gate sets out the stall perfectly, with its gentle tones and swaying melancholy inviting you into the most English of gardens. Lonesome Tonight is lovely with its simple acoustic guitar lines and wonderful lyrics that thrum with a fragile innocence. A Child's Question August is awesome with its mesmeric rhythm and distant dreamy atmospherics. I Inside the Old Eye Dying is one of my favourite PJ Harvey songs, with its gorgeous finger-picked guitars, wiltingly sad melody and total earworm of a chorus. While August snatches the heart from your chest with its shimmering shoegazy guitar swells as PJ sighs, "Someone please, love me tender beneath the trees." Holy shit, feel free to DM me anytime, Miss Harvey. Although at one point during the song Seen Am I, she does sing, "Of devil's birds and whiskey, of chilver hogs and fleecy, nuts I could not reapee, and nuts I could not reapee," which sounds like she might turn up totally drunk, try to fleece me for cash, and then violently reap my nuts. Actually, that does sound like a good first date. So yeah, as I said before, I'm a sucker for records with great atmospheres, and I Inside the Old Year Dying is definitely one of those. I really love the sonic texturing and the lyrical themes on offer here. It's another example of PJ Harvey attempting a specifically focused concept and stylistic direction and just absolutely nailing it. 4.5 stars. Coming in next we have Her from 2004, which was PJ's 6th LP. And here we have what is arguably PJ Harvey's most personal and intimate record. She recorded all of the instrumentation on this LP by herself, with the sole exception of the drums. She also did that in the solace of her own home studio, so Her is about as solo a solo record as you can get. To that end, the lyrics are also reined in to a much smaller, more personal scale, with PJ singing of love, romance and relationships rather than grand concepts or societal concerns. In a way, it almost feels like the polar opposite of her previous LP, Stories from the City, Stories from the Sea, which went as big and as wide as possible. And stylistically speaking, this LP is known for returning to the grungier guitar rock format of her earlier records. Although I think that's a bit of a narrow assessment, as there are deviations from that formula, such as the low burbling dirge, the slow drug, or the marimba-led ballad You Come Through, which is rather beautiful. Speaking about beautiful, this album also houses the track The Desperate Kingdom of Love, which is PJ Harvey's best ever acoustic song. It's just her voice and a simple strum guitar line, and it is gorgeous. But tracks like the moody opener, The Life and Death of Mr. Badmouth, the frantic, stutteringly fun Who the Fuck, and the riff-tastic single The Letter do indeed pull those heavy-set rock guitars back into the mix. But in my opinion, the use of them is a lot more balanced, and PJ is a much better songwriter than she used to be. Plus, she's not overtly aggressive or grimy on this particular release, so I like this a good bit more than her earlier albums. Of course, I might be the only one who feels that way, as Her tends to be overlooked a lot within PJ Harvey's discography, which is a shame because the record's just great. Other highlights would include the gently shimmying Shame, the high-pitched howling vocals of Pocket Knife, and the rampaging pseudo-post-punk of Cat on the Wall. Hell, I even like the more ambient additions such as the guitar and harmonica interlude, The End, and Seagulls, which is just 1 minute of chirping seagulls. But I think that those little detours do add a lot of atmosphere to the record. So yeah, add into that the cool descending piano riffs of It's You, and the trip-hoppy and emotive closer The Darker Days of Me and Him, and you have an excellent LP that keeps the quality of songwriting high and offers up a snapshot of PJ Harvey at her most vulnerable and emotionally salient. 4.5 stars. Next up we have Is This Desire from 1998, which was PJ's 4th LP. And here we find Miss Harvey going full on experimental art rock, completely setting aside the fuzzing guitars of her earlier work and replacing them with lots of distorted bass and trip hop elements. Whilst that might seem like an odd left turn, back in 1998 that kind of thing was all the rage. The UK music scene had been walloped by the twin impacts of Portishead's self-titled LP and Radiohead's OK Computer, and most British rock bands were scrambling into the arena of trip-hoppy art rock to avoid going down with the sinking Britpop ship. So despite being a bit of an outlier within her discography, Is This Desire was actually dead centre of the contemporary zeitgeist. That of course should send up some red flags, as the whole late 90s trip-hop boom resulted in some really god-awful records. So it's a testament to PJ Harvey's quality that her entry into the pantheon of trip-hop is pretty damn awesome. The entire record thrums with a sleek, icy cool, with songs that veer between angular and discordant. The album is also quite dark, with some gothic sensibilities creeping in around the edges. In fact, certain tracks such as PJ's biggest UK hit single, A Perfect Day for Elise, with its stomping gothic jangle, and the excellent atmospheric yet minimalist dirge Catherine really remind me of The Cure. Other highlights on a consistent and moody art rock banger includes the sparse-sounding Americanized alt-rock of the opening Angeline. The Wind is fantastic with its thick sub-bass, trip-hop beats and icy vocal performance. My Beautiful Leah and Joy are defined by a growling distorted bass fuzz that is both kind of unsettling and cool as fuck. They have a sort of grimy desperation pulsing through them. The likes of The Garden and The River are beautiful with their static piano lines integrating perfectly with the grooving bass and trip-hop percussion. Those tracks sound like they might have given Radiohead a few ideas to pocket for Kid A. While tunes like The Sky Lit Up and No Girl So Sweet slap with their fractured yet frantic energy and abrasively grimy atmospheres. So yeah, Is This Desire is one of PJ Harvey's most inventive and coolest records that sees her in her most icily distant yet steamingly sultry mood. Surprisingly, the record doesn't really get a lot of love from the critics, and it has a kind of black sheep of the family type of reputation in general, which I just don't get because I think it's awesome. But the black sheep tag somehow makes me like the record even more. 4.5 stars. Next up we have Stories from the City, Stories from the Sea from the year of 2000, which was PJ Harvey's 5th LP and the one that netted her the first of her 2 Mercury prizes. And basically speaking, this album is PJ Harvey goes mainstream. Here she offers up a huge sounding record of anthemic jangly stadium rock. PJ Harvey is not really an artist that you'd associate with fist pumping, but Stories from the City, Stories from the Sea is about as close as she gets to that kind of territory. The record is also notable for having a kind of American metropolitan feel to it. The soundscapes and lyrical content really reflect the cover photo. I mean, the entire album feels like walking through New York's Times Square in expensive designer brand clothing, which is in stark contrast to her later work. I'm fairly sure that if albums could communicate with each other, the Hope 6 Demolition Project and Eye Inside the Old Year Dying would definitely be giving this particular one the old stink eye. Still though, despite stadium rock not really being PJ Harvey's natural habitat, she still once again managed to hit an absolute home run. And that's simply because the songs on this are just great. They represent PJ Harvey at her catchiest and most accessible. But the record also has a lot of depth, and the moodier tracks are just as emotive as the catchy tracks are effusive. Songs like One Line, Beautiful Feeling and Horses in My Dreams balance out the poppier cuts with their dirgy atmospherics and cracked slow burn grooves. Still though, the heaving stadium rockers is where it's at really on this particular release, and PJ comes right out of the gate with a trilogy of thumping radio ready tunes in Big Exit, Good Fortune and A Place Called Home. They're easily the most mainstream typical pop hits that PJ ever put to tape, and whilst I wouldn't want too many more of those kinds of songs from her, they do get the ball rolling very nicely and set up the general tone of the LP. But my favourite tunes on the album come a bit later on the record. The Whore's Hustle and the Hustler's Whore is a fantastic grimy roar of a tune, its strident heavy guitar thunder turning the sky as black as a Victorian factory district. This Mess We're In is one of PJ's best dirges, that also catches the attention by notably having Radiohead's Tom York on lead vocals. His voice does add a nice vision of variety to the record. You Said Something is a beautiful and romantic ballad with a sticky sweet melody. Its keyboard riff really reminds me of cheesy karaoke backing tracks, which somehow I actually really like. I think I might be losing my mind with that one. Kamikaze meanwhile impresses with its batshit drumming and whiplash pace. This Is Love has a badass rocking swagger that immediately gets the toe tapping. It's one of the most stridently catchy tunes in PJ's catalogue. While Closer, We Float blasts off into the stratosphere with its gigantic melodic liftoff in the chorus. It makes for a real show-stopping finale. So yeah, Stories from the City, Stories from the Sea is a brilliant pop record with a faultless consistency of quality. Every track on this is either good or great. It kind of feels like a peek into an alternate universe where PJ Harvey's a chart-topping rock and pop diva. Personally, I'm glad we ended up with our universe's PJ, but this LP still represents an awesome what if? 5 stars. So here we are at the top of the mountain, and the PJ Harvey Gold Medal is going to go to Let England Shake from 2011, which was PJ's 8th LP and the one that bagged her the second of her Mercury Prize wins. And I know what you're thinking, Chuchu, you have a serious horn on for the Mercury Awards. Well, to be honest, I'm not even really sure what the Mercury Awards actually are. I mean, I believe there are awards for up and coming artists that also include some kind of monetary grant, maybe? I think? So basically speaking, I don't give a shit about the Mercury Awards. It just happens to be the case that my two favourite PJ Harvey records are, coincidentally, the ones that won those awards. Anyway, prestigious awards or not, what we have here is a magnificent concept album based upon World War I and the folly of war and combat in general. As concepts go, it's a really striking one, and PJ Harvey pulls it off superbly. Her lyrics are fantastic across the entire record, evoking images of torn up landscapes, death, loss and ruin. But there's also a kind of connection with nature on the LP too. It feels like the countryside is watching all of this awfulness in its impermanence before continuing on much the same as it had been after all the death and violence has finished. PJ bolsters her lofty ambitions here by working some magic in the engineering and production of the record. The sonic texturing on offer here is fantastic, and the songs all have a hazy, dreamlike quality to them. They sound like they're being played through a thick veil of mist and fog, which totally suits the theme of the album. It's a great case of concept and soundscape coming together in perfect harmony. As for highlights, well, much like some of her other concept albums, this is more about the overall atmosphere and narrative rather than the individual pieces. Still though, there are plenty of bangers lurking around ready to shock and awe you like a sneaky Jerry with a hand grenade. The Glorious Land is rad, its instantly catchy melody and shimmering guitar stutter making it the album's most obvious single cut. Even as Harvey laments, "What is the glorious fruit of our land? Its fruit is orphaned children." The Words That Maketh Murder catches the attention via PJ's really odd yet cool vocal gulps and interesting lyrics that juxtapose politicians announcing things in the United Nations with images of the poor silly buggers who then have to go off and fight and die because of what they just said. The likes of All and Everyone and In the Dark Places have a building wiry guitar energy to them that makes them feel kind of raw and badass. The Flighty on Battleship Hill sees PJ Harvey going up as high as she possibly can in her vocal register. She really seems to be channeling Kate Bush on that, to impressive effect. Bitter Branches meanwhile plays around with beautifully twinkling piano riffs that sound like they're being played miles away from you. While England is absolutely gorgeous. Its sadness-soaked acoustic guitars housing a breathtaking lyric about both loving and hating the country you're from. It's just a patriotic howl of pain. Mwah! Chef's kiss, I absolutely love that song. But yeah, you can't go wrong with anything on this LP. The entire record is just one homogenized slice of awesomeness. And for me personally, it's one of my favourite albums ever made. I mean, it's right up there with records like Ocean Rain by Echo and the Bunnymen, or The Queen is Dead by The Smiths, or Disintegration by The Cure, at the very pinnacle of alt-rock. In short, Let England Shake is a stone cold classic, and for my money the very best album released during the decade of the 2010s. 5 stars! So, now my deep dive is finished, the question remains. Did I gain more appreciation for the artist? And the answer is yes, monumentally so. The truth is that coming into this I had only heard about 2/3 of PJ Harvey's discography, and of the records I had heard I was only intimately familiar with a few of them. So yeah, doing this and just living and breathing nothing but PJ Harvey for the last few weeks was mind-blowing, and she has shot up to the pantheon of the greats. Simply put, PJ Harvey has become one of my very favourite artists off the back of this discography ranker. And that's my list, but of course I know that won't be your list, so why not sound off in the comments and tell me how you'd rank these records. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe and all that other kind of YouTube jazz. Feel free to check out the PJ Harvey Spotify playlist that I personally created, link in the description below. Make sure to take care of yourself, but most importantly, just keep on ranking.